Hi everyone, my name is Mike, and this is part 3 of a series I'm doing on the Windows subsystem for Linux. This will actually be the final video in this series, and in this video we're going to cover just some optional setups. Like I mentioned in the first 2 videos, it's heavily geared towards web development and JavaScript in particular. But even though the tools that we are going to use in this video are for web development and utilizing JavaScript, note that you can plug and play any of your tools and the concepts will still apply. So while this demo is in JavaScript, don't let that interfere with understanding of the concepts that we talk about. So in the first video, we really talked a lot about an overview about what WSL is, why it's important, why it's powerful, and a couple of the caveats about it, and the most important one being the inability of Windows and Windows apps to edit Ubuntu files. And I talked a lot about that one in the first video and a lot in the second video. I spent a lot of time about it in the second video. So I won't talk about it as much here, but understand that that's probably the most important piece that you need to understand when using the Windows subsystem for Linux, at least at the moment. If this changes, I will update this guide and I will remake these videos to include the new workflow that will come with that. But as of now, it's highly recommended that you do not edit any Ubuntu files through Windows or any Windows apps. And if you're confused on that, go ahead and check out the second video from about the 10-minute mark on. Kind of dives a lot more into that piece. Like I mentioned in the other videos, if you have any issues, questions, comments, suggestions, if I've made any mistakes, if you want to fact check me, please do. I'm the only set of eyes on this, and all of your information and feedback is super helpful. Make sure to leave comments in the video, and I'll check those sections as well. Otherwise, feel free to come to this repo where you can add an issue here under the Issues tab. You can create a new issue just like this, and if you want to contact me directly, you can reach me at my email or connect with me on LinkedIn, both of which you can find at github.com/michaeltreat. And while we're here, this is also where you can find the guide, the documented repo that we'll be following through as well. So I will add this link to the video's description so you can find it there as well. A couple other things that I mentioned in the other videos. When you hear me mention Ubuntu, I am referring to the actual subsystem. Ubuntu is the distribution that we're using, but you can use whichever distribution that you like. And other than that, I think that pretty much covers it. So where we left off in the other video, what we did in the other video, just as a quick recap, the second video, the one right before this, is we completed the setup and installation for the WSL feature and the Ubuntu app. So we completed this step. We skipped this and then came back to this at the end of the video. And this was talking a lot about the file systems and the differences between the two. And we also updated our terminal to change the way that it looks, and went about some of this extra information. And now we're at the point where we're ready to start installing some of our software so that we can actually begin our development process. So we're going to click here, and this will take us to 5. So we're on the fifth one out of 6 of these markdown docs. And in this one, we're going to be installing VS Code, Node.js, and Git. And again, these are optional. I already mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but you can plug and play with your own tool set. But the reason I chose these is because these are what I know, but also because they all fill a unique role that we need to talk about. So really, when it comes to installing software and using this WSL guide, it's important to know why you install software on the Ubuntu file system versus why you install it on the Windows file system. And then you also have some things that interact with both the Windows file system and the Ubuntu file system. And so we'll need to talk about all these differences, basically these three scenarios of, do you install it on the Ubuntu, do you install it on the Windows, or can you install it on either/both? So we're going to cover those three, and these three will be VS Code, Node.js, and Git. Excuse me, I'm still coming down. I'm coming off of a cold, so and all this talking over the last 4 hours is kind of getting to me. So please bear with me while I go through the last bit of this doc here. So we're going to start off just by reading this doc, and we'll just start off with VS Code. So it says, at this point, you and your system are totally ready to start developing. So let's get some helpful developer tools and software. It'll talk about why you install something on Windows versus Ubuntu versus both. So VS Code. Here's some information about VS Code. I'll let you read that. And again, also, I don't know if I mentioned it yet, but this guide was originally created as a tool or a reference for some students who will be using this guide as their pre-work to get them ready to go through school. So the code here, it says VS Code is where you will be doing the vast majority of your work. It's referring to some students specifically. So go ahead and just ignore that stuff or whatever. You do not need to use any of the stuff here in order to use WSL. This is just some stuff to show you how we use different software. So VS Code. VS Code is an editor that helps you with your development process. Some of the features is it comes with an integrated terminal, some debugging capabilities, and a helpful built-in source control UI. And that source control UI, I believe, is going to be with Git, but you could use whichever one you want. We're going to use Git because it comes pre-installed with Ubuntu. So what this says, and we're going to go through, I'm going to go through all of these steps. You can skip through the video if you like, and I will try and figure out how to skip through different sections so you can click on that and go through, but we're going to go through these as much as possible. So visit VS Code to download VS Code. Launch the installer, follow the on-screen prompts. When you reach a section for additional tasks, make sure every box is checked. Click install and continue the on-screen prompts. Once you're done, you can open up the terminal, a terminal or the Ubuntu app, and type code to open VS Code. This may or may not require a restart first. Notice how Ubuntu knows the program is installed on the Windows FS. This is because WSL is able to connect both paths together. So VS Code, the reason that, and it talks about it in here, but the reason we install VS Code on the Windows file system is because it needs access to a GUI, right? So because it's a text editor, we need access to a GUI. Because the Ubuntu or WSL feature, the subsystem does not have access to a GUI, at least in our assumption, we know that this one automatically should be installed on the Windows file system. Yeah, I think that's all I want to talk about at this moment. I'll talk about more about that in a second, later on in the video. But at this point, that is one of the main reasons why we need VS Code on the Windows front end. The other piece, I guess I will talk about it now. The other piece is all of our files are going to live on the Windows side. And if you did watch the previous videos, you may know why. I don't know if I explicitly said it, but the reason is because of that caveat, because of the fact that Ubuntu can edit both its files and Windows files. So if we did all of our work on the Ubuntu file system, we would not be giving Windows any option to use those files, right? So by creating Windows files, it allows Windows to use those files and allows Ubuntu to use those files when it needs to. The other nice thing that helps this all kind of flow together smoothly is because they're Windows files, they can be used in VS Code. Whereas if they were Ubuntu files, they could not be used in VS Code because VS Code is a Windows application the way we install it. And if it were to try and update any of those Ubuntu files, it would break. This is why we didn't use VS Code to update our terminal, because that that .profile file, if you remember, that was an Ubuntu file. And we couldn't update that using VS Code. You may have saw that in the demo I showed of where we deleted an Ubuntu file. It didn't actually delete it on the Ubuntu file system. The same thing applies when we try and write code. It may show up in the file, but it doesn't really work. It breaks, corrupts it somehow in some way. It does not work. So that is why we are going to write all of our code on the Windows file system, and that is why we're going to use VS Code on the front end on the Windows file system as well. So this is one use case for installing a piece of software on the Windows file system. The other reason why we would install this on the Windows file system is that we don't necessarily need this editor to run in a POSIX environment, right? It runs just fine in a Windows environment. Now, obviously, you're not going to know that for every piece of software that you download or install, but as a rule of thumb, any software that is used for like development purposes or like build purposes, runtime purposes, things like that, I would install in the Ubuntu file system. But any tools that you use to help you out, like like a code editor, those types of things, anything with a UI that helps with UI purposes as a tool for you as a developer, those could pretty much all be installed on the Windows file system. So enough about that. It may not make sense at this point, but through just working with it, you'll start to understand when something should be installed on Windows versus Ubuntu. And let's take a quick look at these notes. We already covered that one. And these are some errors, and this talks about its integrated terminal, and by default the integrated terminal will use the Windows PowerShell, but this doc will explain how to use and set up the WSL with it. So we're going to go ahead and do this step because it's the first one in the guide. So we're going to go through this right now. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to download for Windows. Thanks for downloading VS Code. We have VS Code being set up here. I am also uploading a video of the previous Windows subsystem, so my internet is a little slow at the moment. Also, while we're here, this is the screen recording software I use, and they're awesome. I had one issue. They got back to me and they patched it and sent me an email within the next day saying they patched it and told me how to fix it, and they're pretty awesome. So check them out. They have a lot of online free services. Back here, looks like this is done, so we can close this page, launch the installer, and follow the on-screen prompts. So we're going to launch the installer, and follow the on-screen prompts. And it says when you reach this section for additional tasks, make sure every box is checked. So we will keep an eye out for that. So you'll notice it's getting installed on Program Files, Microsoft VS Code. Setup will create shortcuts. Additional tasks. Make sure everything is checked. And so what we're checking is create a desktop icon, add Open with Code action to Windows Explorer files, add Open with Code context, register code editor for supported file types, and add to path. These two just allow us, when we right click on things, gives you the option to say Open with Code. Other than that, I think the rest are fairly self-explanatory. Just some info, and we can click install. This is actually going pretty fast. I was going to pause the video, but looks like we're fine. I'm going to scroll up here. Once you're done, you can open up the terminal and type code to open VS Code. This may or may not require a restart first. So I will bring up this toolbar here and possibly pause the video if this takes much longer. But we can take a quick look at the next step while we're waiting. So Node.js. In case you're not familiar with JavaScript, Node.js is basically, you can think of it as the back end of JavaScript. Initially, JavaScript was really all just front end, client side stuff. But with the creation of Node.js, it really gained its back-end capabilities. So Node.js is what allows you to create servers and everything to basically created the term full-stack JavaScript developer. So Node.js is what a lot of students will be using in my school to from their first and second courses, and if they decide to go into the advanced JavaScript course, they'll definitely be using Node.js there. So all the students will come across Node.js at some point, but just some will be more than others. So anyways, this looks like it's completed. Let's go ahead and click finish. And the box also said checked for opening it right away. So I'm going to close that page. That was just a opening for the doc. Now we're going to open this up. And this recording bar is going to show up here. I'm not going to hide it for now. But it says Git not found, install or configure Git. We will work with that in a minute and help us improve it. And it looks like we're good. So by default, this should already be added to the path. We can check that, but we may need to restart before we do. So what I did is opened up the Ubuntu app. Like I mentioned in previous videos, you can also open up the Windows PowerShell and type WSL. And it also brings you right back to the same working directory. It says all, and this says all. Either one is fine. I prefer the Ubuntu app. Oops. So here, oops, I forgot. We're going to type code and see if it opens up. Awesome. So we don't need to restart. It automatically knows what we're talking about. So when we talked about the file systems before, you notice how right now we're on the Windows file system. But if we move back to the Ubuntu file system and we type code, it still knows that we're talking about the code, the VS Code that lives on the Windows file system. So like I mentioned, the Ubuntu app does not specify which file system you're in. Your path to your working directory, your current working directory, specifies where you live. So ls-a, this is just an example. We have a dot profile here. We type code dot profile. It will open up VS Code with this profile. It may be loading, but it may also just be doing what I was telling you and not working. I don't think it's working. So this is exactly what I was mentioning, is that Windows applications don't really work well with Ubuntu applications. So I'm going to click don't save. And I'm going to cat.profile to make sure that I didn't make a mistake. Yeah, so there is some code in this file itself. So now I'm going to navigate to the Windows root. Oops. I'm going to clear. We have nothing in this directory right now. So what I'm going to do is touch a test.js. It's just a JavaScript file. And I'm going to type code test.js. And what we're going to do is add some text into here. Use strict console.log hello world, and we're going to save it. So we saved it. The way I know just with the VS editor is that dot turned to an X, which means there are no changes. When there is a change, it turns back to a circle. Control S to save. So I'm going to close the editor again. If I cat test.js, we see use strict and hello world, and our prompt is back. So that just proves that we are able to edit files using VS Code, and also shows how a Windows application, well, I said earlier that it should be able to read them. It should. This is actually the first instance where I saw that it didn't actually read that file. So either way, the rule still stands. Don't touch Ubuntu files with Windows or Windows apps. cool. Moving on, we're going to work on getting Node installed. So like I mentioned, like I was talking about earlier, Node is the backend. It basically gives you a runtime environment to run JavaScript in. In addition to that, it gives you a lot of other tools that you can use in development. If you're more interested in that, you can visit nodejs.com. But for right now, we're just going to go through the install instructions for installing Node. And this doc does not link back to the Node.js install docs. So this command was taken straight from Node.js docs for how to install it on Ubuntu. But someone did mention that you shouldn't really ever use curl and sudo together. I've never heard that before, but I guess it is not safe. So just a heads up, I will link back to Ubuntu docs, but I got this, or excuse me, I will link back to Node.js install docs, but this is where I got that from. So the one thing I forgot to mention is, why are we installing Node.js on Ubuntu? And the reason is because Node.js is Node.js is a runtime environment, right? It's not just like some and so Node.js comes with npm, which is Node Package Manager. It's very much similar to the apt that comes with Ubuntu. It gives you access to packages, but in addition to that, Node itself is a runtime environment, and this is one of those. This one is one of them where you can install on either Ubuntu or Windows. I decided to install it on Ubuntu just because I like to get in the habit of having all of my software on Ubuntu and then only adding it to Windows as I need it when things come up. So in most cases, Node.js is totally fine to run on the Ubuntu file system. But one of my students did have an issue where it wasn't able to find packages, and he had mentioned that it was something along the lines of that it would continually look up the file structure tree to try and find where the Node packages lived, but it couldn't find it. And technically, the way that the systems are mounted, if it's looking up the tree, it's never really going to get into the Ubuntu file system. That was his explanation. I personally have not run into any issues with this. If you do, please let me know. But Node.js is one of those things where you could totally run it either on Ubuntu or Windows. I chose to run it on Ubuntu simply because that's where I keep all my software. If I needed to, it's something that's easily enough installed that I can easily just move it over to Windows. Now, when you have something on both file systems, like Node.js could be, you're going to want to be careful about knowing which one is which. The pathing is pretty smart about that, but I think I'll leave it there because I don't want to give any misinformation, but you will just want to pay attention to that. Like I said, I've personally never had any issues with that. So my recommendation, install it on Ubuntu. If you have issues, make an issue here on the repo, let me know, and try installing it directly on Windows. So let's go ahead and go through this doc and get this installed on the Ubuntu file system. So the reason I know this is being installed on the Ubuntu file system is I could go online to Node.js and there we go. And it was nodejs.org, and I can install it through the GUI, right? And this would be directly installed to the Windows file system. But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to install it through the command line, and this is what is installing it to the Ubuntu file system. So really, any installations that you do through the command line like this will be installed to the Ubuntu file system. Awesome. So let's install it. So what we're going to do is open the Ubuntu app and type cd tilde. Sorry, my mouse is going crazy. Type cd tilde. This brings us back to the root, which is home KT. And it doesn't matter where you are over here, and it actually doesn't even matter if you were to move here, but I recommend it as a best practice. But you could technically do this at any point, and it would still install it on the Ubuntu file system. Either way, we're going to move to the next step. Sudo apt-get update. We already did that, but we're going to do it again. Password buried sudo. Oddly enough, there is still some more updates. And after that's done, we're going to copy this line and we're going to paste it into the terminal. Right click with a paste, and it automatically did the first command. And then once it's done with that, it should pre-populate the command line with this line, the second line. At that point, we'll just have to hit enter. Let me scroll that down. Bring this up. Okay, and while I was looking away, nope, looks good. So again, this is coming from the Node.js docs, and while we're here, let's look at downloads. So Windows installer, Mac OS, and source code. All download options. That's not what we want. Additional platforms, Linux binaries. Can't remember where it was, so let me just go back. We're going to Google Node.js install Linux. It says download. Download. Let me check the terminal. It's still running. Current. This doesn't look familiar to me, so I feel like it may have changed. Let me take a look. Let's go back to Google. Command line. Here we go. So installing Node.js via package manager, and we are on Ubuntu, Debian and Ubuntu based Linux distributions, right here, and this is the command that we were given. So alternatively for Node.js 10, that's the one that we used. So we went here, basically 10.x, and if we look back at here, it's the exact same thing. So this, I will actually bookmark this because I'm going to add this link to the repo. Resources, perfect. And that way there will be a link to this one as well inside of this doc. Let's check this terminal again. All right, looks like we're good to go. So we're moving on to the next step. And so yeah, let's finish this one. The first line, the second line will show up once the first line is entered. Has finished, press enter when the second line shows up. It looks like we didn't need to press enter. We did not. So here was that line, and it already did it for us. This was that second line that we didn't need to press enter. It automatically did that. So we are back there. I'm going to clear, and now we can close and reopen the app. Might as well do that. Close, reopen, and type node, node-e console.log works, and we get works. So perfect. Looks like Node is working. This is also running Node. This is now the REPL environment. So let x equal 10 x is 10. So this is a REPL environment that node gives us. Control C will let you exit. And while we are here, if we do node test.js, the one that we wrote earlier, we get our hello world. So if we check test.js again, we have this console log of hello world. So I'm going to clear, and we are going to come back. We have now verified the node installation, and so that one's all good to go. Now Git is already installed by default through the Ubuntu file system, right? It comes with Ubuntu. VS Code, however, also uses Git for its source control tool to work, but since VS Code is a Windows application, it doesn't know how to use Ubuntu's version of Git. And again, that's because it is a Windows application, and that Windows application doesn't know how to run itself in a POSIX environment, since Git that came pre-installed in Ubuntu is POSIX. It doesn't know how to use it. On top of that, if VS Code ever needed to manipulate one of Ubuntu Git's files, it would break, since the Windows application cannot manipulate Ubuntu files. So this is why it's recommended that as much of your software is installed in Ubuntu as possible, so that they can each talk to each other and update each other's files easily. But in this case, we need VS Code on Windows, and it just so happens that VS Code needs Git. So in these situations, it's totally fine to install both pieces of software on the Windows FS. It doesn't say it here, but what it means by both pieces of software, it means we can install it on the Ubuntu file system and the Windows file system. So those were the three cases. This first one for VS Code, we install it on the Windows because Windows, it needs access to a GUI, and it's going to need to manipulate Windows files. And there was one other thing I can't remember. I'm drawing a blank on it. Node.js, we want it to run in a POSIX environment as much as possible, but we also have the option of installing on the Windows file system if we wanted to. Git is one of the things that we could install both on. It comes with Ubuntu, so it's already installed on Ubuntu, but we could also install it on Windows, and we just have to associate VS Code with Git on Windows, so it knows how to use that one. And that's because a piece of software that is installed on Windows is trying to use that. If that situation weren't there, if our text editor or VS Code did not need to use Git, we would not need to install Git on the Windows file system. So this is really all this guide talks about is just software. It doesn't talk about the workflow for files, and that will really be in the next section. We're talking about directory and file workflow. So the section we're on now is really just all about software. So if that doesn't make sense, or if I was not clear enough on that, please add a comment to the suggestions, add a comment or give me a suggestion. I will go back and rehash this part and make it a little bit more clear. But that is why we are installing these three pieces of software where we are installing them. Cool, so let's go ahead and install Git. So first, I just want to check, because I haven't checked in a while, we're going to move over to our Ubuntu root, and we're going to type Git. Cool. So if it didn't know what Git, or Git wasn't there, it would say, command unknown, like, where'd it go? Like if we type this, doesn't know, command not found. So it knows what Git is because it is installed. So Git is already on Ubuntu. Now we're going to go through and install Git on Windows. And let's see, that's why it's recommended. Now there are two versions of Git installed, right? Correct. The nice thing about WSL is that the way that the path is set up, it knows which one to use and when. More on that after we install Git on Windows. So what this link here, step 1, step 2, step 1 will actually take us to the site where we can install Git. Git SCMs, right here. This is a weird spot to put it. Is not very apparent, but right here, click this. We are on 64-bit. It already knew that, so it installed it. That is taking looks like it's taking a minute. I may pause the video if that takes too long. Also, that's still going. Okay. Awesome. Let's look back at our guide. Follow the on-screen instructions. Choose the default values for each prompt, except when it asks you to choose the default editor used by Git. Click the drop-down and choose VS Code option. This will allow you to handle merge conflicts in your editor instead of using command line, which is another reason to have Git on Windows as well. So we can close this because it doesn't look like we need it anymore. This is about halfway done. So let's continue reading. Continue choosing the default option to finish the installation. Git for Windows also comes with a terminal called Git Bash. So you may have heard me mention Git Bash in previous videos, but this is what me and a lot of other Windows users have used as their solution to this POSIX Unix-like terminal problem. So Git Bash is a wrapper, wraps around your terminal, essentially, the way I understand it. It's a wrapper that wraps around your basically Windows PowerShell and translates the commands that you give it into commands that the Windows PowerShell can understand. But this wrapper, it's not perfect, right? There's some, commands that exist in a POSIX environment that don't exist in the Windows PowerShell or the Windows environment. And that's what causes a lot of breakage. The most notable one, I don't know if I mentioned it in this video, was trying to deploy my local database and push it up to Heroku. Heroku came up with a command line for Postgres database, and the command was pg push. And there's a command under the hood when you typed, pg push in your local database. A command that was executed under the hood, something along the lines of env, it broke, and there was a really messy workaround to fix that, right? But it broke, and that's what these wrappers, while they're really good, and Git Bash is really good at what it does, it's not perfect, because if there's no word to translate it into, there's just no word. It can't just make up a word, right? So having this native POSIX environment really overcomes that limitation that Git Bash had. There's really no way Git Bash could overcome, because it's really something that Windows needed to address, which is why I'm so excited that they have. Oh, I thought it was still installing. Okay, awesome. Well, it looks like we can continue to move on, follow the on-screen instructions, and choose all the prompts. So let's go ahead and go through that. Yep, install. And here's our preamble license. Cool. It's going to install in program files /git. And there's something about this. Choose the default values for each prompt, except when it asks you to choose a default editor. I don't see anything in here about Git Bash here, Git GUI. I don't see anything about a default editor. Don't see anything there. Use Vim as Git's default editor. We're actually going to use Visual Studio Code. And I see another option here which I don't remember seeing before, but I'm going to assume we just choose the first one, because use Visual Studio Code Insiders, that doesn't sound familiar. So just Visual Studio Code. Yep, that looks good. We're going to click Next. We're going to choose the default values, default values, default values, and default values. Yep, and now we're ready to go. It's installing. And I believe that's it. So when we're done, we're going to move down to this verifying Git. So it says now that we have Git installed on both file systems, because remember it came pre-installed in Ubuntu, and it's now installed on Windows, let's check which Git Ubuntu is using. So yeah, I remember this step. So in this step, I may as well wait until everything is installed. And let's see, is there anything else I could talk about while it's installing? Nope. So I'm going to pause the video here and wait until it's finished installing. Awesome. So it looks like it actually completed pretty quickly. So I'm not going to view the release notes or launch Git Bash. I'm just going to click Finish. And it says, now that we have Git installed, let's check which Git Ubuntu is using. So let's open up here our Ubuntu terminal. And I'm going to clear this again. And just so you know, we are on our Ubuntu root. And here we're going to start following these steps. Open a new terminal, the Ubuntu app, and type where is Git, and where is one command. Where is Git? You'll see that Git is in /user/bin/git, and it's also in the share area. So because we installed this software outside of the Ubuntu file system, right? We installed Git through the web browser. It's not connected. WSL did not connect it. And you'll see that when we talk about, where is Git, the program Git, it knows that it's on the Ubuntu file system, right? So now type which Git. Same thing. It's talking about in Ubuntu, it's going to be using this Git right here. Let's see. I lost my spot. Oh, here it is. Notice that it only shows the one at Ubuntu. That is the Git that will be used when you are in your terminals. So our terminals are going to be using the Git that's pre-installed with Ubuntu. Now type code to open code. And this says inside the editor, press Control-Shift+U. Actually, we can see that this error already is changed. This was the error earlier that said something about Git not being found. But it looks like Control-Shift-U actually does open this section anyways. And it says press Control-Shift-U to open the output section. To the right of the output, there's a drop-down. Choose the one that says Git. So over here is what it's talking about, and it's already been selected onto Git. It should say something like using Git 2.1.7, 2.17, and it looks like it's actually using 2.18, so I'll go and update that. But yeah, it actually looks like it is working. And it says from C program files git cmd git.exe. So, and it says this means that it will use this Git to handle its source control tool. So you'll see that we have, at this point, we now have Git installed both on our Ubuntu file system using through WSL and on our Windows file system not using WSL. The same thing with code. If we were to go here and type where is code, it says code is in the you see where it says MNTC. Since we're at C, we know that if it's past that point, it's on the Windows file system. So at this point, it says that it's in the Windows file system, and it's also at the Windows file system right here. So it looks like for some reason it showed up twice. I don't see the difference there. Which code, same thing. It's pointing to the one over there. So the pathing that comes with Ubuntu and WSL is really intuitive. So it knows how to connect them really well. Know that if something is installed through here, it's typically being installed on the Ubuntu file system. If you install something through the GUI, through the web, it's being installed on the Windows file system, and it's not being associated with the WSL app except through the pathing. Awesome. So we're going to go through this last thing just to set up the config for Git. Let's see. The final step here is to add your email and name to the Git config. This will allow you to commit and push things to GitHub. Cool. Let's do it. So this it doesn't say where to do it, but so I'll make this a little more clear. But you should be doing it on your terminal. I'm going to clear the terminal. I'm going to type git config global user.email, and these tab autocompletes are working, so it knows what we're talking about. michael.leon.treat@gmail.com. End it with single quotes. Enter. No error. And it says your name in single quotes here, your email in single quotes. We're going to do the same thing, config --global user.name Michael, I think it's Michael Leon Treat. Awesome. Git config -l user email. Perfect. So it looks like we're good. And now we're ready to wrap up. Yep, that looks all good. Let's go through the final steps. And this is really going to be about the directory and workflow and some of the different quality of life things. So I'm not actually going to go through all of this stuff because this stuff is totally optional, and it really just depends on whichever tools you've decided to install. So like everything basically down from here is just designed for the students in who are going following this as pre-work. But I do want to talk about this section, and it'll be pretty brief because we've already kind of talked about it. But basically what this section is talking about is that up until this point, we've only really talked about the two file systems and installing software, but not much about how your actual development workflow looks like. So we're going to walk through that really quickly. I'll let you read this, but basically I'm going to show you what it looks like if I wanted to use a project. So if I want to use a project, if I want to start work on a project. So first I'm going to go to my GitHub and I'll make a new repository. My mouse is going crazy. I'm going to make a new repository. What? Sorry, my mouse went nuts there. Perfect. New repo. And we're going to call this WSL video test, just for right now. Initialize with a README, create a repo. So this would be my normal workflow. If you're a student watching this and you have not learned GitHub yet, you will. So this process will be pretty familiar to you by the end of your 4 or 8 weeks, whichever one you're doing. But we've made a new repo, and now we want to clone this down to our machine. So we're going to clone this down right here. We're going to come back to WSL. We're going to open the app, and here we have a file. I'm going to remove that file real quick, and we're going to make a new directory. I'm just going to call it work, and we're going to cd into work, and I'm going to clone down that repo. And right click allows you to clone, copy, or excuse me, paste, it looks like. So I'm cloning that down. We're going to cd into it. And now you'll notice that we're actually in a GitHub repo. And the way I know that is because these brackets show up and it shows me which branch I'm on. So what we're going to do is, just because out of habit for me, I don't like working on master, I'm going to do a git checkout -b testing. And we're on a testing branch. We're going to type code dot to open up everything in here, and now opens up VS Code, and I'm going to click this to get rid of that. This welcome page always shows up. I'm going to get rid of it, and I'm going to close it. And you'll notice that because I initialized that repository with a README, there is a README file here, but there's nothing else inside of here. I don't think I added anything. No. So let's add a file, touch test.js, and you'll notice the symbol changes. This is the status part that will tell you there's a new file here. If you type git status, it'll show you an untracked file has been added. If my mouse stopped working again. Okay. If we come over here, we'll see that test.js was added. We're going to do a use strict here again. Looks like it has some linter already set up with it. Use strict console.log testing from inside the WSL video test. I'm going to save that, and we're also going to do Control-Shift-U to show the output. Go back to Git, and you'll notice that the Git version control is actually working here. So before we saw an error saying not a Git repository, now we are in a Git repository, so we know that this is working. VS Code has a source control tab here, so this will show you your source control stuff, let you know any changes that have been made versus each commit. So we've saved this. We're going to close this, We're going to type code. For me, I'm just going to type node test.js. Was that what I named this? Yes, node test.js. And again, we get testing from inside the WSL test app. Video test. We're going to do a git commit -m. There we go. Testing out Git and workflow. Oh, how did I miss the git add? Git add dot git commit and git push origin testing, and it's going to ask for this thing, and I'm going to pause it here. Awesome. So it was able to successfully push up. So what this did was it tested our git config, so it knows our git config, otherwise it would throw an error. It tested basically the sample workflow that we go through, and you'll notice that in this workflow we never used anything with the Ubuntu file system. Not one thing in this case used the Ubuntu file system. And the reason is because we aren't running any software to do any of this stuff, with the exception of Node, right? Because actually we didn't even use Node in this case. We did it to test our file, but really that software is running on Ubuntu, but it took the file we made on Windows, took it, it ran it, no errors, and it outputted what we expected, and then we just continued with the rest of our workflow. So that's really everything that this section talks about your directory and workflow. That's pretty much it. This section here, it basically says this is because that is where you'll be doing 99% of your work. And it talks about why we changed that last line of CWR to start directly in your Windows file system, meaning when we close this, it starts right here. It's because this is where you're going to be doing all of your work, basically on your Windows file system. So that's pretty much it. The rest of this guide, if you're a student watching the rest of this guide, I'd recommend going through these last couple sections and getting this linter set up. I will leave this for you to go through, to take everything you've learned in these videos and apply these last pieces of this guide together and try and get it working. I'm not even going to dive into it like I really want to right now. I'm just going to ignore it and let you all figure that out. If there are any bugs with it, please let me know. Make an issue. Send me an email. If you are on the school Slack, send me a Slack. If you're not on the school Slack, leave a comment. Anything that comes up, please let me know. No matter how minor it is, even if it's just your user error or anything like that, let me know. Because it's something I could possibly make more clear. So other than that, what I will probably do after this thing is make a shortcut video which just goes through all of these steps with very minimal talking. This is now almost 2 hours long, 2.5 hours long of watching all these videos, and that's a lot just for as little as we actually did. But hopefully it helped you understand the entire workflow on how to use WSL. At this point, you should be in a good spot to be able to install any software you need appropriately and to work on your projects appropriately. And I'm really excited to see how people take this and how they grow from it. So keep me updated. Let me know how you're all doing. I'm going to make the shortcut video. The other thing I would recommend is coming back to this section and looking at installs. I mentioned this in the first video, but it was really quick. There is a Postgres and a MongoDB installation section. These are both pieces of software that you would want to be installed on your Windows subsystem. And if you want to, you can follow through with these and see how that works. This is really just informational, and if you're a student following this guide as pre-work, you will need to install both of these to be able to complete the course. So other than that, I'm going to leave it there. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions.